Thank you. This is the March 3rd meeting of the Large House Review Committee.
Hey, guys, I can't see any video.
All right, well, she's gonna work on that.
We'll work on that while we do the audio.
Awfully demanding.
This is a hybrid.
We're good.
Artie Crocker, co-chair, is logging in from home. I'm going to announce that this meeting is a Zoom meeting. It's hybrid, so all of our votes will be roll call. It is conducted in concordance with the Massachusetts state regulations regarding public meetings conducted through Zoom. The meeting is now called to order. The first item on our agenda is the approval of the meeting minutes from the previous meeting. There were 2 comments by members present. They were technical corrections, and those will be corrected online and on the town website. Is there a motion to accept the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? We're going to take a roll call vote. And this roll call vote will also serve to record who is present at this meeting. Artie Crocker.
Aye.
Aye.
Heidi Frail.
Aye.
Mary Ann Cooley. Absent. Mo Handel here. Tina Burgos.
Here, but I'm abstaining from the minutes because I wasn't here for that meeting.
Okay. Nick Ligris. Oscar, Paul McGovern.
Here, and
Bill Paulson.
here, and yes.
Oscar Mertz.
Yes.
Chris Cotter.
Yes.
Rob Dangle.
Aye.
Joe Matthews.
Aye.
Ed Quinlan.
Aye.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is a report of the working group regarding the housing tour survey results and the discussion of the house tour impressions. Oscar Mertz will be presenting this report. This was an effort on the part of the working group to see within a very subjective response to houses around the town that were built on undersized lots, whether there was some consensus about what made them fit or not fit comfortably into the neighborhoods where they're located. I'm going to call on Oscar Mertz to,
I'm gonna pass on to Joe.
oh, and
You can
that
just acknowledge Joe if you want.
Joe is here. I did not call your name?
No, you did. You did. Yes,
Oh,
but
okay.
he's gonna actually do the. he's
Oh,
gonna do the
Joe
survey.
Matthews and Oscar Mertz will do the report of the working group. So why don't you take the floor?
Sure.
Do you want to put up the last slide to start? I think this was the good kind of summary.
Sure.
The text one. I mean, so I thought that it was, first of all, I think it was a useful exercise. Because I hope that not only did everyone get a chance to look at these houses, but you probably went by dozens more and during the course of this exercise. I think that there were some things that were a bit surprising when I was looking through some of the results. I think the first one overall was that, and I mentioned this to some of the working group members, that it seemed like maybe the feeling or the impression that someone got was influencing, how they felt about the house, which is natural. But when you went and compared the objective sizes of the houses, it didn't match up with the feelings. In other words, I think one of the examples was house, the very kind of square modern one. I think people really didn't like that, but objectively it wasn't the biggest. I mean, there are other ones which were bigger, which people felt okay with. So, I mean, I think that was just something to think about. The presence of like trees did soften the impact. I think that people it helped if you had a mature tree kind of on the edge, it kind of lessened the impact. That's what I got from the comments. Height was a big thing without any, both just outright the height as well as some design principles, which were obviously coming from people with more expertise. I didn't personally have anything to say about gables or maybe the one with the large dormer or whatnot. And also two other things that influenced were what the house was next to, like the power of juxtaposition. if there was just a cape or a ranch next to it, the houses seemed really out of place. Whereas if they were next to other houses which have been constructed in the past few years, it seemed more natural to the neighborhood. We did get some comments also on, I didn't see the exact pattern, but just to notice the comments on the garage. I think this is something that had been talked about before, not just the presence of the garage, but its distance to the street and the presence of it being built over, whether it was a second or a second and a half story. But yeah, I mean, a lot to look at here. I think the one thing that probably would have been, I don't know if it would have influenced or made people biased, but I think we had to remember these were supposed to be the smallest houses, right? Because they're a lot of them are 7,000 square foot lots. So perhaps something to think about when you go back and review. But yeah, I don't know, Oscar, if you want to.
No, I think that's good. Thanks, Joe. My only additional observations were that it seemed like in the survey, there were 4 clearly that people thought were too large for the neighborhood, based on, again, everyone's personal take on it, as you talked about, depending on whatever influenced them. Then there were the next group that were all predominant or a preponderance of comments about height. So that, but yet they all were not, they were in the 50-50 range, where the surveyors were split on whether or not they were appropriate for the neighborhood. And then, of course, there were ones that the last group, which were not offensive to people in terms of their appropriateness for the neighborhood. So I think what that, my takeaway on all that was, height was something that we could take as an instrument of adjustment, perhaps. And I do think the fact that we used the smaller lots as our first group of houses was quite intentional, because we thought that would be more obvious opportunity for houses to look too big in their context, because these were going to be tight frontages, tight lots, smaller lots. But yes, it was interesting that there was quite a number of houses that you would have thought people would have said were too big, and they did not get, or they got the 50-50 vote. So again, I think I'd be curious to get some additional comments from not just our working group, but people who did the tour, if they had any other observations they thought were important as a takeaway.
Can you just mention something about the lot coverage and the FAR for the houses we looked at?
Yeah, one of the things that was again clear is that the lot coverage is, the limit on lot coverage is 30%, and all of these lots are in the 20 to 25% coverage. And the ones that were considered large or not appropriate were a little bit higher. They were in the 23 to 25%. So that's probably something to think about if we want to use coverage as a tool. The FARs were all very high. These are all at the 38% FAR. So I think that's a question again for whether or not we think we're going to adjust the FARs. And again, this also raises the question about how are we going to count the FARs? So I guess we're getting into that next item there, which is discussing measuring tools. But I think before we get there, I wanted to just get more feedback from the broader group, the committee, on any other thoughts you had after the tour, or do you think the survey responses were adequate to convey your ideas?
You have the floor, so you might as well chair this part.
Yeah, anyone here, who's here, Chris?
For me, the biggest impression is if you stood in front of the house, how much of your viewpoint did it take up? And that's a little bit of height and a little bit of width, but it's a little bit, and it's also how far the house is set back. There were a couple ones where if they seem to be set back a little bit further, even if the house was probably just as big, visually it took a little bit less of the impression on you. I think also the road, how the road set also helped. There were a couple houses where your road was a little bit higher, so when you're standing out, even again, the house was the same height, visually it just took up less of your space. And then also some other ones that were kind of counter to that. I don't really know the argument against that, but there were a couple ones where it was built up on the hill, even if it was a smaller house, it just seemed that much more impressive.
Right. Yeah. So where this house sat on the site.
Correct. And then there were a couple, if you moved around to the side, like from the front, I didn't think it was too bad, but then from the side, you just saw how long in the lot it carried back. And then that gave me almost a little bit of a different viewpoint. As we talk about, if we adjust FAR, I just wrote a note to myself, where would that adjustment happen? Because if it's the same from the street, does that actually solve our issue as well too? Because if I'm the developer, I'd probably give you a bigger backyard, the front would stay the exact same. And then 2 point from the street, you have the same exact appearance, even if you have a lower FAR.
I think that was something that we talked about in the working group, that we noticed the houses were basically, for side setbacks were almost always pushed back. The design, and then the front, I agree. I mean, I don't think we looked at that much, but it seemed like they come as far forward as you allow, so. The far, I mean, it could come from the back, it could also come from the top as well. I think that all else equal, people probably would prefer to have more second floor space than third or basement, but. Theory.
I also thought that the closer the offensive height was to the front of the house, the more impact it had. So yeah, like it just
Very obviously.
was very obvious. If that height was towards the back, I mean, I know we had that one house where it was off to the side and that wasn't great for the neighbors because they were so close to the side setbacks in these smaller lots. But generally, I think that that's one way to potentially allow the height, but without the feeling of overwhelming giganticness.
So you're saying.
Would be to push it away from the
Not on the front. of the
front.
house.
I noticed Artie has this.
Artie?
Yeah, thanks, lady. Sorry, so, yeah, similar to Chris, I mean, that was certainly a good observation. You know, standing in front of the house, how much is it taking up? For me, still, a lot of it, you know, certainly was hitting the height of the house in the front. But a lot of it was also hitting I was surprised by how many of these houses had the garage at the same elevation, same frontal setback as the main, or even further, even closer to the street than the main. I was a little surprised about that one. To be honest, I actually thought that was taken care of before in 2000, back when, not that many years ago. So I was a little surprised about that one because that made a huge difference in how big a house looked like. And then again, going the side, looking at it from the side, all of a sudden going back, and how big the gables were on the front or on the side, and how tall it looked. There was one house, sorry, I think it was Maple Street. I think we had a house on Maple Street where that house, technically, I think it was big on the lot, but it was done in such a way where it didn't look that big on the lot. I thought it was Maple Street. I could be wrong.
Artie, we're gonna try to use the house number so we don't out anybody.
I'm sorry. Sorry, gang. I don't see it right now. Hold on. Oh, where the hell is it?
Street is number 8.
I'm not seeing it. Oh, maybe
Number 8.
maybe 8. Maybe, yeah, it might have been 8. Maybe, maybe. Although the side looks obviously has a gable, but on the right hand side, which is not showing here, it was broken up. The height was broken up, even the distance going back seemed to be broken up because the height was varying as it was going back. Now, I'm not saying we're going to have we're going to be able to regulate that per se going back, but that strangely, this one, even though the garage is in the front, the entrance, it didn't look offensive to me because the entrance it was around the side. That one was just interesting to me. But in general, the garages in the front gave a really bad appeal to it. And then we're looking at house number 4 with that flat gable going across. That was massively high. Anyway, so again, for me, height, garage, depth going back, how big it looked going back. Those are the things that were really hitting for me. Sorry, that's about all I got. Sorry.
Yeah. But if you look at number 8, and you can see the house next to it, the height's not really that different from the one next to it. A lot of these houses fit in pretty well. I mean, there was one I think I was looking at a second ago, number 6 maybe, or Yeah, number 6, that has what you're talking about, where it's garage, first floor, and a gable over it, so maximum height is at the closest to the street. But if you look at the yellow house next to it, it's not massively big compared to that yellow house in terms of height. You know, it goes back further, right? So you're getting
More box, more volume
Yeah.
of house.
and that's where if there were a tree, some sort of trees or evergreens or something, like arborvitae's on the side, it would break that up some. But without that, it looks deep. A lot of these houses look deep. Like, that's not so bad, actually. That goes back in, but
So in house 6, if you look at that first shot, the one thing that's interesting there is that is the difference between the older homes and the newer homes. It's the ceiling heights. You can see that the eave of the existing house on the right and the eave of the house on the left, it's the new house, are a couple of feet off. And that's simply because the ground floor is now probably close to 9 feet and the upper floor, second floor is 8 feet.
Right.
And the other house is probably 8 and 7, 6 or something.
Mhm.
Yeah, so
Well, in this case, the house to the right, the yellow house, has, I believe, a lower pitched roof, and so the attic area is not as dominating as the newer house as well. So at least
Yes.
the left section of the newer house. So yeah, I mean, certainly the height of the house relative to the house next to it made a big difference to me.
I think that the space between the houses, when you get the two houses that are close together and there's a huge difference, like the one with the angle.
Yeah.
That's like, whoa. Whereas with some space between, and as a percentage, it's not, the white one's not that much taller than the yellow one, right? One
Yeah.
number 6.
Although I would say
it is.
it's,
I
it
think,
is the
yeah.
fact that
Ridge
the
is much
maximum
taller.
height is at the side setback
Right.
that gives you that feeling of,
Yeah.
whoa,
Yeah.
yeah.
That
But
house
it's
is
not
much.
like the rest of the
When you're
house,
driving by.
if that was centered, it wouldn't be nearly as startling.
Yeah.
It's
But
also,
you've got this area over here on the right, that peak that sort of matches up with these, it's broken up a little, right? So.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's another observation that we were also talking about in our working group, is that when you have the house that is basically the same plane all the way across versus some that had a volume that was coming forward and then another part of the front was set back a good 5 or 6 or 8 feet, then you did not feel at a, sort of as you drive by, you don't feel like it's one big front. But there are definitely some houses that look like they were basically all out at the front plane or very close to the front plane. And I think some of those are, the one that's probably the most obvious was,
just a quick comment on
Yeah.
6 before we move on from it. It is true that it doesn't look as, I think this was something that I kind of pointed towards, was that you can't always just go off what's next to the house, as if it's okay by juxtaposing with that, because what if that was a cape there or a ranch? Right, so this is why it's important to do the survey, but also think that this is how you kind of normalize this and it kind of creeps higher. Because that's not a small house on the other side. It's not a big house for sure, and number 6, but in the attic is probably, I can imagine, as a real, what we think of conventionally as an attic, probably a crawl space, not finished or inhabited. But yeah, Oscar.
Can I ask you a question?
Just one last thing
Yeah.
on that, to the left of the White House
Hmm.
are all new construction homes.
Yeah,
yes.
So it looks totally normal next
Yeah.
to those.
No.
And then to the right, it's all older homes.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, again, I'm pointing again to the garage in the front. If that front entrance, if the garage is pushed back and the front entrances, if the elevations were changed, if the setbacks were changed, that house wouldn't have a much smaller feel to it. Well, compared to where it is now. And so I'm not sure what the house to the left of that looks like relative to the setbacks, but the garage is sitting right there. It's going all the way up to the height, and whereas the right-hand side, it's not. It's pushed back, and it's a different plane, different roof pitch going a different direction than azimuth. So it has a big difference. So that house is big, in my opinion. That house is big in front, because of what's in front, because the garage is front versus the front entrance. So for me, that's big.
How much of the conversation is, and I'm very novice to all this, is measurable aspects, for example, setback FAR versus design aspects. Because in in a lot of the comments that I'm hearing, I'm having a hard time discerning what is measurable versus I don't like the way this looks because it is a design aspect.
Yeah.
So then how do we reconcile that? Or how do we pull, how we would know? How
Yeah,
does- how do
that's
we-
a key
How do we
question.
pull that out?
Yep.
In order to come up with, sort of move this forward? Because I think from a design perspective, that's a much harder, that's a much harder thing to grasp, I feel
I think
like.
as the working group, that was one of the intents as to why we wanted to do this survey, was to see, is there a common link? Is there a criteria that's driving this? I think from the results of the test, there basically isn't one criteria. Tall is one of the things that comes up everywhere, no question. I think tall is one of the biggest issues. I think undoubtedly style plays a huge role in people's comments. If you take, even just, could you go to the summary sheet? Just with pictures, you know?
Yeah.
You take the one that got the most negative votes is number 4.
The pictures are the
The
last.
pictures, just all 12 pictures or whatever, or 15
Oh,
pictures, sorry.
yeah. Yeah, on the front page.
And again, this isn't scientific, but again, if you look at it, the one that got
Yeah.
the least appropriate is number 1, is number 4. Second in that category is number 2. Third is number 15. Fourth is number 7. The modern height, I think, definitely is a huge factor. And style, I think unquestionably, the modern style houses seem to have brought about a more negative effect. And I think what this does is highlights the difficulties of this committee. It's first of all defining what is and what isn't inappropriate,
Yeah, right.
and then trying to find, you know, what criteria is, obviously you can't necessarily dictate people's style. But the criteria that's going to have the biggest impact, the common theme for the most part that seems to be fixable is probably height.
And potentially the coverage. You know?
Well, yeah, cover,
Yeah.
but nobody got near coverage.
But
so-
nobody, yeah, there were some comments about how deep the buildings went into the site, and so there were small backyards and so on, you know,
Yeah.
those kinds of comments. But you're right, I think height is,
Near the current lot coverage,
Nobody got near the correct.
but that is
Yeah.
something
Yes.
we could mess with.
The allowance was set at 30, but that was done for some particular reason, but without any, I don't think there was any real thought or test of that, because
Right. You're
clearly
saying
everything was
if we were to
FAR
bring that down- if we were to
covered.
Bring that down, that would
Right,
make the house smaller.
right, right, and so I think that's something worth studying, because I think the coverage. Coverage makes more of an impact on what you can actually, you know, the footprints, and so obviously when we looked at the last meeting, when we looked at those aerial shots of. The old houses that didn't have the garages, that had detached garages, and then as soon as you started to see houses that had the embedded garage. All of a sudden, the bulk went to a different, like a 2x factor, because you had house above garage, so you had a large volume of house
Yeah.
that was much bigger,
But on the other hand,
yes,
if you look at house number 12, it's
Yes.
built on top of the garage.
yes.
It is big. But it doesn't have it doesn't have a huge lot coverage, but that just depends on how big. But
Right.
this house, everybody likes.
See, that house
So-
also the hill though.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, that one, that one wasn't offensive to me in
I
many
mean,
ways.
the back is,
So
the back is
you're looking
extra
now
story.
at the low point and then the hill goes up. So if you're at the top, the other corner of the front road property line, you're probably 5 feet up or so of grade. So if you're staring out, looking at the house now, there's 5 feet less of the height in front of your eyes.
This one
Okay.
also,
The house is here and the lot is going up like that.
this one
Right.
doesn't have a 3rd floor, if I'm not mistaken, from the,
The height is actually quite a bit lower than some of the
Right,
others.
so,
Yeah, this
but
was-
I guess what that says to me is that actually height is our problem.
Yeah, well, I
Height
think
is
height is the one
controllable.
that seems to be everybody's commenting on,
Yeah.
even if they thought that they were appropriate, they
It
still said they were
confirms, yeah.
tall. So I think if you look at this whole 15-page spread here, I think if probably everybody here could pick the 5 that say, wow, those are tall.
Mhm.
And I think that's why that's sort of a lead into the next.
do you have the height
We go to the,
May I?
maybe the slide
Yeah.
for, because I think if you look at the
Gene has a
statistics,
question.
the measurements, yeah. Sorry.
Sergeant, yes.
Oh, I just wanted to have an opportunity to comment.
Yes.
In general, I thought this was wonderful to have this tour. And when you see a house, a big house with a garage in front, you know this is the new house. And driving through the neighborhoods, what surprised me is how many of the new reconstructed houses there are in our town now.
Mhm.
So the character of these neighborhoods is already in a way changed, to have a lot of these large houses and the post-World War II capes and ranch there. I was really surprised. That's what struck me more than anything, was to see how many of the new houses there are. Now, the ones we focused on, I assume, were built under the new rules that went into effect, just a few years ago. And one thing I noticed with all 15 of the houses, I didn't see any problem with high basements or anything that made it appear that there had been efforts to elevate the site, to make it higher. And I remember that we had a big problem with a house over by if it's Bird's Hill, but that other hill that when you go in toward the golf course, with a house that was built on a hill and it had like 4 stories with a walkout basement, the first.
Oh,
the second-
Wachusett,
Yeah.
on your
And
Wachusett.
we made some changes in the zoning to accommodate that, but I didn't see any problems with basements.
No.
And I'm gonna go on to say the reason I focus on that too. But this idea that the houses are too tall, one thing that struck me was the angle of dormers. When you had a house with dormers on the, going up to the 3rd floor that were at an acute angle, and some of them even had 2 dormers, one behind the other, both at the same big angle. Those houses gave a big appearance of being tall. But what can we do about it? Because we really can't, like Wellesley, they have everybody come into the planning board and every single house gets reviewed. We're not going to do that. And so it's what we can do about design is very limited. My general conclusion as far as the, high size of houses is 2 things with regard to height. If we could just bring the height down a few feet. And I think you had a design that showed that. And also, I know we started out with Joe's proposal that we not count the basements or the attics. But presently we don't, but we should. And I'm thinking we should count the attics. Leave the basements alone. As far as, all right, if it's in the basement, we're not counting it in the floor. But if it's in the attic, now that might discourage. I didn't go back and look at how many of these houses had actual space that would be countable because of the height. And so
I think all but 2.
12.
all but 2 had
Oh,
some.
was another one?
All but 2, yeah.
All but 2, I think they're all had.
But people could still, if they want to have kind of 100, 1800s older colonial look with gables, they can still do that. But they most likely would, with limits like that, would use the attic for storage, not so much for living space. This is really beside the point, I suppose. But a house I owned 40 years ago had a back staircase from the kitchen going up to the 3rd floor where there was a bedroom. And it was clearly for servants. And there was a bathroom on the way up, and that was like an extra bathroom. But that people don't have servants anymore and need bedrooms for them in the attic. So I just think we could control those houses that look very high. On the other hand, there were many negative comments about 609 Honeywell Street.
not using the
We're not
address.
using that.
What?
We're not using the addresses.
What
We're
number?
using the
What
house
number?
numbers on the
Oh,
display
all
here.
right, I'd have to
And
go
the
back.
reason is,
07.
that we're trying to protect privacy of the
Oh, I
people
see.
who own the house.
It's house 7. There were many negative comments about the design. I like the design. I liked that house more than any of the 15 houses we saw. And
There's
yet there were
70.
many negative comments. And this all just goes to show that it's, we cannot control design and people's idea of what's a nice design differs, you know? One thing I wondered about many of the houses that were listed is, how is it that they could exceed the established FAR?
One did, yeah.
Yeah.
On the chart, they've exceeded it.
We don't know.
Did we talk to the building inspector about that?
We haven't yet.
Yeah, I just don't understand that unless it couldn't be, I thought, is there a prior non-conforming structure? Well, if you were tearing down an old small house, it wouldn't have had an excessive FAR.
We can
Um,
certainly find out.
And the interesting thing about that house is that it was not deemed by anyone in the survey to be offensive, you know, and that is unusual. You'd think that because it had an FAR
Oh,
breach,
yeah,
that it would have
okay.
been considered to be, but that's a very unusual case where the site sloped and there was the house stepped down. And it had a setback on the front and the side because it's a corner. So
Which number was that? What number was that?
it's one.
Yeah, okay.
And so, yeah, again, so this is where perception is, you know, very different from what you might.
Another thing, I remember in the new zoning, is, and it's, you know, it's on the sheets of paper we got with the zoning, is that the front setback is designed so that, the house can be 20 feet from the front lot line, but the garage has to be set back an additional 5 feet. I didn't see that. They're either just putting the whole house back 25 feet. Why? I remember I served on the prior committee, and one of the members of the committee said, that's what builders are gonna do. Because they get the designs out of a box, and this is how they're designed with the garage going up front, and they just won't do that. And it appears that's true. Nobody has done that. And that's too bad, because we thought that was an important change. I'm almost finished. House 5. One thing I noticed about this house and its neighborhood is that it was in a neighborhood both of a few what appeared to be new houses, but also a lot of large, older, 100-year-old homes, lovely old homes. But of course, the big difference is in the older homes, the garage is in the rear. And that gives them a charm that these newer homes simply don't have. So anyway, I conclude by saying I think we should lower the heights, and I think we should not include, and I think we should include attic space in the FAR.
Thank you, Gene.
Regarding the basement, I mean, you don't have to include the basement, but then you just have to realize exactly what is there and what isn't and how to count. So, you know, if you don't have the basement, then you just have to reduce the FAR to recognize that, so you properly control the first and second floor, because generally the basement is going to be almost exactly the same as the first floor, just smaller because the foundation's wider, so the interior space is maybe 5, 6, 7% lower, something like that.
Just a quick question on that. Do newer homes have the basement under the garage?
No,
No, so
Some,
that.
yeah, I would say
some do,
typically they're
but-
quite, and
So it's not quite the first floor.
the
That's what-
interior, I meant the interior
Yeah.
livable, less the garage.
So that's why some of the garages appear to be about 2 feet below the first floor,
Yeah.
2 or 3 feet below the first floor. Oh, I didn't.
So they
know
actually
that.
have a higher
Yeah.
ceiling, so the floors will be typically the second floor, it
Oh.
comes across all of them. So the
Mhm.
garage has more height.
Oh,
very, very rare that there aren't at least one and probably more steps from the garage into the house.
oh, yeah.
Very unusual that there
Right.
wouldn't be.
You
But I
have
would
to
say
have
the
that for-
basement
for
is.
gas, so the gas vapors don't get into the house.
Yes.
There's gasoline vapors,
It has to be more.
so they sit in the garage and they can't get into the house.
I think the one thing that we need to recognize is it's one thing to try to regulate the size by the use on the interior. It's quite another to let the use on the interior flow from however the maximum bulk you can put on a site is. And that makes it easier to regulate because then you don't have to micromanage the design program of the floors. So it doesn't matter if somebody's using the basement or not, because the basement doesn't really affect the bulk unless it goes above the
Right.
lot, and it can only go a certain distance above the lot. Maybe.
No, but I mean, the point with the basements is it adds economic value to the project, which is the trigger for this whole thing one of the helpful triggers for the whole process to occur in the first place.
That's certainly true, but that's an issue I personally care a lot about.
Yeah.
But it's very different from trying to figure out what the effect of the bulk in the neighborhood is.
Sure. No,
And
I'm-
it should be addressed by
Yeah.
this committee, but at this stage,
Yeah,
we're looking at the bulk.
yeah. No, I'm just saying you can get the same exact result without counting the basement. You just have to calibrate your
FAR.
your
Yeah.
FAR, your other restrictions
Yes,
appropriately. You don't,
exactly.
yeah, you don't take out the basement you don't want.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, the only issue with the basement was that if we are saying our honest charge here is to say, what is your what's the perception of the house? And unless the garage is, as you say, inordinately popped out of the ground, it's not a factor in the impression of the house. So if we're going to say that is the gravy of the development opportunity is that lower level is their plus. That's their big buff, that's their bonus, but that we are gonna track everything above ground. But I think that sort of goes back to all of us putting blinders on to say, this will not be about style, this will be about the impact of this bulk or volume on the lot, and that we are trying to establish what is that tipping point of an appropriate volume versus something that's not appropriate anymore.
Right.
Right, and so in doing that, I think what the consensus of all the comments was that height was, and I think we've heard it again tonight, that height is something we should think about because it was not tracked at all in the 2017 guidelines. And it seems like that's one to think about, and then maybe coverage of the site, the lot coverage, maybe something else we can think about. So shall we move on?
Yes, we should
Okay.
move on.
So-
Real fast,
Yeah.
number 12.
Yeah.
Just to maybe wrap it up on that. Cause it was the one that was kind of,
Yeah,
yeah, just to point out, cause you look at the height on it. It's not even, it's 30.
It's not
Whereas
a
a lot-
35-foot height, for
Yeah.
sure.
That's the average.
And they just don't have the, apparently they don't have walkable third space.
Right.
Which is, I think maybe some things that, people were picking up on when they said it seemed all right. Of course, the hill, yeah, that was probably a factor as well.
It almost looks like a story and a half.
Yeah, I mean, objectively it has less net square footage than almost all the other ones. So that's probably consider.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at the plans to see if there's any attic, actual attic space. It does look like it's awfully tight, although there are a set of windows that could be
Yeah.
into attic space that's not habitable, but.
But it would be, I mean, that would be tight, right?
It would be
30
tight.
feet.
It would be tight, but again, you have a fair amount of volume that goes back into that other, but I don't see any other third floor windows in the two other gables on the side.
According to that fire chart, it doesn't have any livable space. The chart on the left
Right.
does not, it's zero.
That house, that house, when it's going back, it looks like it's more of a 2-foot shift. I think the regulation is 2 feet shift when you go back to the wall, so it wasn't one long wall. For some reason, that looks like it's a bigger shift than 2 feet, but I can't tell from here, but that makes a big difference, that shift and having enough of a shift, in the wall going back can make a big difference in the bulk as well. But anyway, I agree. I think lot coverage, height, and garage issues is where it's coming down.
So we'll come back to this later in our work. The next discussion point is the height study.
Yeah.
And that's also you, Austin.
Can you bring that and have that, Alex?
Is there?
Yes, thank you. So what this is taking one of the houses, and it's really a diagram to show, this is not literally redesigning these houses with lower floors, but what it's saying is, if you were to take one of the houses that we've studied or all of them for that matter, or we could pick a few of them, and we were to test what the house volume would look like and how it would change if we reduced the ceilings to something less than what they are, which are probably, I think most of these are 9 foot ground floors and upper floors, second floors are 8 feet. And so when you look at the difference, and again, you can see the impact of the older homes that had the lower ceiling heights with these, side by side. I think, if we go back to that first page, the one that's most dramatic is probably house 5. If you look at house 5 and you look at the house to the left, you see that that house probably has maybe 8 and 7 something foot ceilings. And it's up against a 9 and an 8, and the eaves of the second floor are so dramatically different. So again, this is a way potentially for us to look at how we can adjust the impressions of houses going forward. And it also doesn't effectively change the value of the house. You could probably argue that there wouldn't be much value or loss of the sale price if you had an 8'6" first floor versus a 9'6", a 9 foot floor to floor.
Yeah, but aren't
And-
we not worrying about what's inside?
We are, but I'm just saying, the impact of pushing down on the ridge is to have to take a slice through these houses.
Yeah.
Doesn't cut
And
the
so
value.
you're not losing value, you're just bringing the house volume down. And it's gonna be
Easier to
short
heat.
and leaves you easier to heat, yes.
True.
All the good things, and it's less for someone to pay for their facades, maybe the windows are a little shorter. So there are a lot of advantages.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you're showing in the diagram, right?
Yes.
You have the maximum. So if you take the maximum, you reduce it by 2 feet, you gotta take it somewhere, and you can't take it from the floors or the foundation, so it has to come out of the
Yes.
Yeah.
first, second, or third.
Yes, and so this math basically shows you if you were to take it down to 33 or to go to 32 from what is currently a 35-foot limit, you are not gonna make a huge amount of impact on the actual interior volume experience of the house.
So devil's advocate here,
Yes.
very simple with all this. If we're thinking we want to control the bulk and control the height, why do we care what's going on inside the house? Like, why do we care about calculating the FAR if really we're trying to control the size of the building overall?
Well, FAR is-
Why,
the FAR
excuse me,
is the
why do we,
size.
why do we want,
Yeah.
why do we care about what's going on in the attic or the basement? If it meets the dimensional requirements that we deem appropriate and all agree on, all that, like, that would self-control, would it not?
But this is just to show the actual, where when you lose height,
Mhm.
where does it,
Where
where do you
Right.
lose it?
Right,
So
I
it's just,
keep
so
hearing-
there's a point where you can't go too low, because then it just might not work.
Yeah.
And you could sacrifice the attic if you wanted to maintain the
Right,
9
if you have
foot
to bring your
ceiling.
bridge down, right, you can drop your
Yeah,
ridge.
so
Right, but
you-
the way it looks outside, which I think is what people find the most offensive,
Right,
the net of that, we control it, so. I just, like, I hear us trying to focus on, okay, are we gonna count the basement, are we gonna count the attic, like, I think we can control that, we just control it.
I think the ceiling height discussion came with, is there some way to preserve the relative value of the homes that
Right.
are being built with new homes of less bulk, exterior bulk? And one way to do that is to reduce the height. And then if you did that, where would the space come from? And you would have to reduce the ceiling on the first floor. And could that be done without affecting the sellability of the house and maintain the less bulk that we're trying to get after?
At some point.
So we're not mandating that if we decided to go this route, we wouldn't say you can't exceed 8.5 feet for a ceiling on the first floor. That would be a question for the developer and whether or not
Where they wanna put their.
where they want to put the height. And if they take it out of the attic, that makes the attic usable space less, but you don't have to define how much space there can be in the attic.
That's the
I
FAR.
just try to keep it simple, that's.
Yeah.
So at some point, you're gonna get to a point where they say, okay, we'll just screw the attic, we're not gonna do the attic. Right, we'll just make that storage space with a pull down stairs.
Right.
And then if you include the attic and the FAR, or you do the ceiling, the building height, whatever, we're gonna need to watch that lot coverage, because they're gonna, if they can't put it in the attic. they're
I
gonna-
think that's-
Right, exactly.
They're gonna
think-
grow the house to the max of the lot coverage.
I think I think this is
Yeah.
all about trying to
Yeah.
reduce all of these things.
Yeah,
Without
think there's a-
defining how much
without-
space for each activity you can have in the house.
Yeah, I mean, that was why we have to use the FAR in conjunction, because the reason why these attics are appearing is because they're not counted, so you just basically throw them on top, although 12 was this weird exception where they could have done it, but they opted not to. So if you were to just do the height, for example, and you didn't use FAR, then they would just, most of these have space in the back, so we just push it out. So, yeah, it's important to use a mix of controls, and I think we were trying to maybe talk a little bit about what we would do would be maybe easier. So I think we just showed this is just 2 or 3 feet of reduction from 35. And what we talked about in the working group was if we went from 35 to 33-ish, you basically are not gonna be doing that much, right? So it's gonna be very cosmetic. When you move to 32, you're squeezing a little more, and 31. And if you brought it down to 30 or 29, now you're saying, all right, you really are not gonna do
But you're not gonna
any
get
kind
a
of third floor. So just not even to say what, suggesting that, but just to let people know that the implications. That if we
Exactly.
go to 33, might not, there are only a handful of houses that reached that level in this study. But there were almost none that were below 31. So that's kind of the range we are starting to influence.
So the thought on that is that we could test the effects of losing height, taking height out, by bringing this height down, by taking some of the existing homes and having them be built as models. And then literally shrink the models and be able to see what that would look like. And I think that would be an interesting study, something that we could have a consultant do. But that's a conversation down the road, but it would be
Right.
something that we have the capability of doing, actually seeing the impact of what that volume change would look like.
So people would be able to visualize it before.
So you
it
can
got
set them up
adopted.
existing, and then if you change it to this height, and if you change it to this height. And you could. I just would be interesting to see how much change that one would perceive.
If there aren't any other comments, this is a good segue into the next discussion. Because one of the things that we need to establish is what would be the effect of anything we might propose on the market value of property that's being developed, and how does that fit in with the historical experience of what the tear downs have done in terms of home value and what percentage of houses get redeveloped or what percentage of houses turn over and get renovated. So that would be another working group with some real estate expertise. I know Bill would be a huge asset in that, but what do people feel about that?
and it's numbers for the builders, right? And if the price of new construction homes continues to go up, then you get lucky, right? Because you're changing the rules, but it's not impacting the homeowners as much versus last year because the price of houses went up, right? But if you're changing the rules to a point where the house that gets built is worth less now than what it would have been last year, the builders usually try and do a third thing. They buy for a third, build for a third, and then the last third is paying the realtors profit, carrying costs, financing costs, that kind of stuff. So they're only gonna pay so much for the properties, and they look at, when I call a builder and I say, I've got this property, they say, oh, okay, what do they want? And that's the first question. And the next is, what's the sellout, And then they're doing the numbers in their head. What do I have to build there? So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. There was a time, a number of years back, where one of the builders was buying up smaller lots and building smaller homes on these lots. And he was making just as much money as the guys making the big homes, because he was making a smaller home and selling for less, but the profit margin was the same for him. So, but that means he was buying smaller lots for less money, right?
Right.
So it's, Yeah, it's gonna have an impact on the homeowners that have a lot that's a builder's lot.
So is there a way to develop the data that would tell us what the experience actually has been in a way that we could all look at?
Is that gonna be accurate given the reassessments just recently? I
No
mean,
assessments, but I can go back and look at new homes that have sold and tell you what they sold for and what the builder paid for them.
right, but it's my understanding that now lots that are unimproved have increased in value because there's fewer and fewer of them left and because of the action that's been taken on other lots. So doesn't that inherently unbalance the builder's equation? Like, if you are buying a lot that is now not a secret any longer, it's unimproved, and therefore the value has gone up,
That's why,
that throws off your equation regardless.
but that's why the price of homes keeps going up.
Yes,
But
yes,
that's-
of course.
That's just the assessed value. There's the market that people are paying and then assessed. These are two different things.
They're not as
Supposed to
different
be
as they used to
related,
be.
They're
but
though.
they're
supposed to
not
be- yeah,
exactly
but
related.
That's
the change
just,
the
that's
assessed
just
value doesn't,
taxes, and
yeah.
taxes are not looked at even in the equation at all.
like, there's a market, for example, but when they did that reevaluation with the increased value to the land, it didn't change the market for building, because there's already a market for that.
You take an older home where the assessment is for $1 million, the lot might be $600,000, and the house might be 400. You ain't buying that for 600, even if it's a tear down.
Well, yes.
You're still
right.
given the million for it, so you're paying, even if that house is being torn down.
Mhm.
So.
Right,
I
but
don't
then,
think you can
then
really use
your land
assessments.
costs have gone so high that, I mean,
But they were
that's
already
gonna
that high.
suppress the market for the desire on the part of builders to build on that land anyway,
I think
regardless of, like,
No, but the assessed values changed were changed to reflect the reality. The reality didn't change. I think is kind of the,
yeah.
So you're saying that the assessed value was getting brought up because
It
of
was
the
lagging.
incredible increase in,
well, it was
The
lagging
cost
behind
of-
the market
yeah,
by,
yeah.
I mean, supposed to, but it was by more than,
so it was a
Yeah.
self-correction, or was it correction?
My understanding is that about a third of the houses didn't have a significant change,
That's true,
and about a third the
decrease.
value went down, and about a third the value went up. But somebody coming along looking for land, I mean, I have gotten personally 3 inquiries on my home in the last 2 weeks, unsolicited.
That happens a
So
lot.
there's a crying
No,
Really,
market to acquire property and redevelop it
yeah,
in Needham and probably the surrounding suburbs.
And that's not changing.
But this is prime.
Right.
Needham is prime.
I will say that I just did a quick look at the houses that were sold on MLS that were built in 2024, and about half of them don't have third floors.
Don't call out as third floors, but that doesn't mean that they weren't actually built with them there.
true.
They're not advertising any space on the third floor.
Yeah.
It's
They
a
would be.
pull downstairs.
If any place, they would be there.
What maybe?
What houses
they
are
just
these
let-
you're speaking of?
Tell
There
me
are
more
houses
about
on
homes.
multiple listing service that were built in 2024 and sold.
Yeah,
The half of them have pull down stairs, half of them have,
so they're not really using
Nothing.
that space,
Didn't do it.
half of them have space up there.
not developing that space for a living space.
Are they new construction?
They were all built in 2024.
Oh, good, okay. I'm surprised by that.
yeah. We would like to see it verified if it wasn't the phenomenon of it, having some other use.
Well, that's why I
Because that
How many have
is
finished
really
basements?
surprising.
How many have finished?
Yeah.
It's not surprising to me. I walk through these houses all the time and I see a
Yeah.
lot of pull down stairs, so,
How many have finished basements?
oh, most of them, I think.
Yeah.
Most of them have basement space.
I saw a recent multi-list for a house in our neighborhood. We live near each other, Joe and I. So they had the listing of the square footage. And then they had the listing for the square footage in the basement, which they put out there as livable space, but counted separately. So they're using the basement and they have attic space as well.
I said half, right? There is a whole nother half that definitely does all 4 floors.
So
Yeah, MLS, like about a year ago, changed the way we enter things so that you have to say, you know, how much is above ground and how much is below ground, so the data is getting much better as a result of that.
I think what we're talking about doing here possibly is to review the value of what you were saying there, Bill, is to do, and I started it with a bunch of the houses, these ones, that what's available for what they sold for initially, if they sold to a developer, and what they sold for after, on, say, the newer house. I think that's kind of what we're talking about, doing a survey.
Right, so I'm looking at one here, it's sold for it's on the market for 3.2. And I can see that it's sold for it's sold for no, it's sold in 2004, so this is a different situation, it's not a.
So there might have been a family that bought it and then they lived in it for a while and then they decided they were gonna do it. Yeah, so that's a different animal.
That's a
too.
different animal.
You'll
That's not
see,
important to know.
you'll realize those anomalies if, when you're looking at the results as well, that
This
Yeah,
is
not a regular
this one's
situation.
3.2, and they bought it in 2024 for 1.17. So that's the third, right?
So,
Do you want to talk about having a work group to look at this?
yeah,
Why
yeah.
don't you describe?
yeah,
what you
well,
want to-
I guess. What would be, I think we've all come to conclusions that there is going to have to be some acknowledgement that whatever the changes we're doing to adjust, refine, recalibrate the measuring tools for large houses going forward, right? That's the charge, that we have to figure out a way that we can come to a conclusion, give materials to the planning board, let's say, that they can then evaluate what they would want to do to address the measuring of houses. Part of that, I think, we all have come to, I think it's fair to say that we understand that there are the possibilities for those changes affecting the sale price, or affecting what a builder would want to pay for that property if it has some kind of reduced, future size. So I think the one thing that's challenging is that we're dealing with a marketplace that had a very lenient potential for those houses being built. So the delta of what a size of a house could be built is so big that there was the potential for some greater value to that property when it was sold, because there was this enhanced value to the property, which may now be curtailed somewhat. So I think we all understand we need to just be able to have some research that can point to some of those differences in the value of the house, whether it's the value that they, the purchase price and then the next sale price, and what's that difference? I was also wondering if we could evaluate the sale of a house that never went to market. Right, all the houses that went directly to builders are out of the assessor's office or something, so we can see what values they were bought for.
I can search public
Right.
record. I was doing that search on MLS for the third floor, but I can search public record for all the houses.
Because I think we know, I think we've talked about
I did
this.
it for the first 11 houses for the information that was available. I think 3 of them or 4 of them were homeowners, so there was no sale price. There was an original, again, from the registry of deeds and some of that information is from publicly available information.
So
I
4 of the
found
11.
An original sale price prior to construction, and some of them had a sale price obviously after construction, but a number of them were done by homeowners. So it's
We're not necessarily looking for the delta between the sale price and the price of the new home, right? We're looking for the difference between the sale price to a developer versus the sale price to someone who is not a developer.
We do want
That's
to
where
know
the
that.
impact comes to the homeowner, not, I mean,
I will tell you
there's
that
a
those numbers
profit
are
issue.
pretty close. Those
That's what
numbers
I
are pretty
think.
Close, because the advantage for you're the homeowner, right? The advantage to you of buying from the builder is that there's no inspection and you can
there's
close quickly, or if
cash
you want to
and
stay, you can do that.
whatever.
It's very flexible terms, right? But if this person's gonna offer you more money, most of the time they'll take the more money over the terms. I've had houses that have had builder and homeowner offers, like multiple offers, and some builders and owners. And if it's all things being equal, they'll sell to the homeowner rather than the builder, because they don't want the house to get knocked down.
Right, I just think it's important to note that difference, because it's not necessary, we're not trying to measure what the delta is, like what the price increase
I'm
would
just
be.
saying that
We're
there's
trying to
not-
measure
There's not.
if
that
there's a
much difference.
benefit
That's
to the
homeowner.
seller in the original instance, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the new buyer, right, well, I mean, so the buyer that's not looking to tear it down, that simply wants to move into Needham. The fact that we're implementing some changes which could affect the developers much more so than anyone else. The price directly to them, the price may not change at all. They still want that house for $1.2 million in the building.
Okay, that would be important for us to know,
Yeah,
because that's gonna
exactly.
influence
Yeah,
how the
exactly.
seniors feel
Yeah.
about this
Yeah,
change.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Because now maybe they can, they can have a little bit more competing for it, because maybe the builders now want to pay less than the regular homeowner. Who knows? But I mean, I think that's the big part of it. Yeah, how much effect that has, like Heidi is saying.
This is huge. And the other issue that we gotta get our arms around, I think all these discussions that we've been having in the small group anyway. The assumptions have been that if we constrain the size of the house a lot more than it's constrained with the current bylaws, that the value of that land will go down. But you're saying a little while ago that some mysterious builder was building smaller houses, making the same money as the guy building a 6,000 square foot house. If that's true, then adjustments to FAR that might constrain bulk, maybe there isn't that penalty that we all assumed was gonna happen.
But he was saying.
No,
they're
he was,
paying
he was
less
paying,
lots.
yeah, he was getting small lots where other builders were saying, I can't build my normal house on that lot, so I'm gonna pass. He was saying, I'll take it because it's less money
He had a niche.
and I'll build a smaller house on it.
Ratio thing.
Right,
So we'll have different groups of builders building instead of
Yeah,
the big
That's
house
okay.
builders will get the medium.
and actually, isn't that what we're
homeowner-
looking for, the
homeowner
smaller
selling
lots
the-
to have
The
smaller
house that's gonna be
homes?
knocked down will get less money because.
There's a logic
smaller
to
lot.
smaller lots.
But
having
we're,
smaller
yeah, we're looking
houses.
for smaller lots to have smaller homes, so,
Right.
so actually just having a ratio system makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
I guess the question is still on the table that we think it's a working group task.
Yeah,
And that you and any others who may want to join that would be,
what's the answer we're trying to solve?
I think you guys take on that challenge. What are the metrics that we need to look at from sales histories? And whether it's sold directly to builders or whether it's competing with builders and homeowners. I even like to go back and go way back so you can see 20, 25 years ago, what was the and I'm curious, like, what's the asking price versus was the final sale price? So if they were getting a lot of increases to the asking price, so they're inflated to a certain level. Is there some pattern there as well, given that there was bidding on some of these? So I guess
I think if
there
you
are
look
lots
at-
of things
I think
to
if you-
study and.
Like one hypothesis is that if you look at 2017, when we put in the large house review rules in the first place, right? If you look at the value of the homes that are knocked down homes, you know, over time it went like this, and maybe it saw a little dip, but then it sort of kept going again. And that's one hypothesis. This is what we'll see again. We'll see a little dip, but then it's gonna keep, as long as homes keep going up in value like they have over the last, 25 years, then the price of those knockdowns will continue to go up, but they might take a dip in the middle.
I guess the other thought we were talking about was that if the constraints make it more likely that end users will buy versus builders will buy and rebuild, right? If that changes the dynamic there, so there are more actual homeowners buying homes because they're not getting outbid by builders, or it's less inviting for builders to build and knock down and build a huge house, then that means that's a different dynamic.
I think, yeah.
What is that, but what does that do to the?
That practically doesn't happen all that much, because those homeowners, I think, have a hard time getting in front of the realtors and the builders. But the realtors and the builders are on it, right? And those homeowners have jobs. So it's hard for them to get to that, to a house like that. But the one category that we haven't discussed is rehabbers. And it would be nice if the rehabbers got a little bit more of a foot in the door and were able to compete better with the builders. The problem with the rehabbers is that our energy rules are such that once they start doing a certain amount of work, now that it really takes them down a rabbit hole because they get.
Gotta stay at $9.99.
Yeah, now they have to do all this insulation and everything else, and like, there was one in my neighborhood, and they tore the thing down to basically, they left the basement and the first floor walls extra, like the plywood going up and the studs, that was it, and then they built back up from there. And that's not a rehab, that's basically new construction.
But to go back to something you said earlier, I think at some point, we all need to come to grips with the fact that we don't have a level playing field. When somebody puts a house on the market, the potential home buyer is not in an advantageous position to compete in that market for that house. And so I think we owe it to ourselves to understand what causes that and whether there's some way to make that playing field a little more level so that somebody could conceivably compete in it who can't now compete in it.
It comes down to the amount of work that a home needs, right? If you look at a house and it has updated kitchens and bathrooms, the roof is reasonably new, doesn't have to be done in the next 5 years, and the heating system has been well maintained and it doesn't have to be changed right away.
Right.
The builder can't touch it. It's gonna go to a homeowner.
But when I talked to the previous building commissioner about the trends in the tear downs, he said that there was a 40 to 45% of the homes that were going into the dumpster were homes that were cosmetically a step away from being owned. So there was a lot of houses that could have gone to families, but they couldn't compete. So this is the level playing field. Can we do anything to change that metric and not change significantly the return to the seller?
And I think also there's a really large percentage of people in older homes who stop updating their systems and taking care of their roof because they assume that
They're
their
gonna
house
cash
is
out,
just gonna
right.
get, well,
Get knocked
I
down.
don't know if it's
No,
cash
they're-
out, but I think they think that there's no alternative.
Right, it's gonna get torn
I
down, so
mean,
why spend
yeah, I'm
money on it?
sure in some instances, yeah, but I think I've heard a lot of people say like, oh, my house is just gonna get torn down, so why
Yeah,
would I
all the
spend
time,
money
all
on the
the
new
time, right.
furnace or whatever,
All the
new roof? Because it's just gonna be a waste.
But that's the thing, is that you really don't,
But
you can keep the builders away. just by
right, but
doing a
I'm just
couple
saying,
updates.
if the house size, if that equation doesn't work as well for the builders, then maybe there's more incentive for the homeowner to keep the house up, because then they can sell it to another homeowner. I mean, and not lose value, because that's where we're at, right? It's
Yeah.
trying to just.
And that's an
maintain
issue we
value.
should be
Can I
looking
just-
at and figuring out a way to help.
And
So
can I
where is
just-
that equilibrium point? Is
Yeah.
that what we're looking
Yeah.
for?
I mean,
Yeah,
I literally bought a fixer upper, but I'm not sure you can do that anymore.
You can,
Yeah,
but
you
a lot of
can.
people are like 2 incomes and they don't want
They don't have
it.
the same
It's
kind of
too much work
time.
for me, they say that a lot, right?
Yeah,
So-
but you also can, I bet you'll find lots of families who will be happy with a 999 square foot addition on that house.
And there's some people who be happy
There's
with the house
definitely a market
itself.
out there. Oh, and the house itself,
The house itself.
until they have a
If you,
kid.
if you look at the houses right now, there's 25 houses on the market, one is below 1 million. And then there's 1, 2, 3 below 2 million, and then everything else is 2 million and up.
That's just for the house.
Yeah.
And the lawn.
So if you have a good 1950s.
There's a market for
colonial,
you.
right?
Fix it up.
Fix it up, because it's worth it,
Um,
totally worth it.
I happened to notice a house that was being added onto, on the street that, I guess, right across from Emery Grover backyard. I forget the name of that street.
Oakland.
Oakland, okay, thank you, Oakland. And I began to talk with the builder who was working on the site, and it happened the homeowner was there too, although he had to run in the house and take a phone call. So I kept talking to the builder, and his name was Bill Germain, and he gave me his business card. And what impressed me was that they were putting on an addition on this nice older home, and they were taking the old, little accessory garage and adding on to it, so you could fit two cars in it, although one car would be behind the other. And I just never seen that be done before.
There's one on Kingsbury.
Yeah, and I just liked I liked what he was doing. I haven't gone back and looked at it as it's come along in about a month since I took his business card. But I thought, how could we get, you were talking earlier about having the builders who do renovations or additions talk to us somehow, and that's what I had in mind when I took this card. I just want to mention that.
So what are we asking Bill to produce that would help inform this
Not just you,
discussion?
Bill. It would be good to.
And the committee.
I want to hear from Paul. I think Paul tried to say something.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So I'm a builder who has done more additions and renovations probably than I have new build. And in the current market, I'm just in the process of finishing one on my own house. And I will not see that money back. I'll probably just about break even, and I'm doing it at construction costs. Again, back to what you said, Bill, I went over the 999, so I had to upgrade the entire property. I had to reside it, I had to do new windows, I had to upgrade the heating system, which is the new energy code, which just makes it that it's basically, the business model for remodel, for buying a lot at $1 million plus, spending 600,000 or 700,000 on it to add 1,000 square feet and upgrade the rest of the house, you're just not getting it back. So that's why the economic model doesn't work for them to do it. It may work for, it may work for
900 square feet.
But just do 999.
Yeah.
That
yes,
changes.
but most times when you're going into that older house that needs that, the original part of the house needs upgrades and stuff as well.
In your opinion, as a town, have we gone too far on the environmental regulation?
Well, that's statewide, that's not a town thing. It's a statewide,
We're not going
the biggest
backwards.
issue the negative issue with that, which defeats the intent of what it was set out to do, is it punishes the houses that need the most work. They're the ones that get punished the most. So the older the house, the worse condition, the more in need of a remodel it is. That it makes it more expensive to do that remodel and bring the entire house. A new house that's already in decent condition and you just want to add 7 or 8 or 999 square feet to it, and you're not touching the original part of the house, maybe that one is economical.
I guess I'm saying there are a lot of those that are getting torn down.
Because
new homes that are getting torn
the
down.
remodel isn't economical for the developer.
Or they just want to
Unintended
knock down a nice house and
build a
make a
$3 million
much bigger house.
But I think
That's-
this
and that's
truly
happening.
what he
That's
said.
happening.
For any developer,
That's
it all-
happening because of the leniency in the bylaws right now.
But it always for the developer, it always comes down to economics. It comes down to if it was more economical for that, if he could throw a figure on it, if he was making 200,000 on the new build, if he could make 250,000 on the remodel, he's going to do that. He's not doing it. The economics is proving that that's not happening.
Yeah, I guess the question is, is there a model out there for the renovating the houses that are in relatively good shape that just need an addition on them, which may be a user, but buys it,
Or
needs
not.
it later.
You don't
Or they
need
don't-
an
or they
addition,
don't
just
need the
have to
addition.
polish what's there.
But they don't need to do the big addition that changes the whole math, right?
Yeah.
That's the point here. We do have lots of houses that are livable for families that maybe have a future small addition in their future when they have a growing family. And that's the dynamic that I think we're trying to.
Well, what do
figure
we
out how to
need,
how to
what do we
affect.
need from this committee if we establish it that would give us enough information to be able to report back to the planning board on the effect of what we're proposing to do?
So for me, there's almost two types of buyers for every lot. There's the developers who tear it down, you're buying it for the land, and then there's the homeowner who's gonna live in there, whether it's perfect right away, remodel, what it is. And for every lot, somebody would pay a price to buy it. If it's a large lot, a developer wouldn't pay that much because they can't develop it further, but vice versa. So you need to find out your point for the lots that are on the edge for developer or on the edge for someone who's living, what each person would value it, and then be able to see how much it could affect the future buildability. Will you bring it back down to a person who would buy it to live there versus it's too tricky to live, it'll cost a little too much. It goes for 20, 30K more to developer, and then it's off the market for that.
But I think that's kind of what Bill mentioned, but that depends a lot on the quality of the house, the
Correct.
condition of the house.
Yes.
And so I think for me, I said a lot of this kind of related stuff because it's super complicated when you get into the economics and really the politics around it. Because it's not just data driven, there's qualitative and philosophical questions to answer. But I think the easiest way to put it is, for me, I felt like this whole being able to build these very large houses fundamentally distorted the market. It basically turned everything into land rather than homes, right? And so I think that's what we're trying to work towards, is to make it so this huge incentive isn't hanging out there that has turned everything into land. We should make homes actually be valued like their homes, and that to incentivize people to maintain them so that they could get a better sale price, but not bringing it back so far that some houses, for whatever reason, old lady living around there for the last, 5-10 years of her life, she could have maintained it, not to just make the new build so small at the time, to basically destroy that value, right? That's kind of what we're looking for, to try to think about how much to bring it back to make the market function, but not so much that you just, punish anyone who just wasn't thinking that far in advance, or really couldn't, or maybe a lot of the ones that were built in the first half of the 20th century, they're just fundamentally flawed from the get-go, and there really wasn't any saving it. So I think that's my.
Right, in
philosophical stance.
today's market, a smaller house on that small lot, let's say that goes for 2.5. If you divide it by 3, now you're in the 8 something,
Yeah.
right? Instead of $1 million, you've lost some value.
Yeah.
But even $1 million, like, you're not gonna get 3 on one of those small lots unless it's in a really great location.
But if the house is in good condition, it's probably gonna be 1.1, because then you get people who have now been trained to say, if I wanna live in Needham, even a smaller normal house, it's gotta be 1.2 million. And there, now you have a end user competition, rather than a builder who has this huge, unbeatable advantage.
That's what I'm saying,
Yeah.
like, if you take care of your house, it won't
Yeah.
be sold to a builder.
Yeah.
Because there's so few homes in that under 2 million range that.
Yeah.
They're going like this,
Yeah.
and
So isn't that the distinction? Like what the sale price is gonna be? We already have a market full of million plus. So if you're 2 million or less, but really if you're 1 million or less, right?
I'm sorry, I'm not following.
I don't think there's anything under 1 million.
Well, there's one
One. The
house
condo?
on West, it's actually a condo, it's not. a house. But there was one that just sold on corner Fair Oaks and Dedham, but. Fair Oaks and Dedham.
Oh, that was,
But
that was like 5,000 square foot lot or something like that,
Yeah,
wasn't it?
it's quite rare.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Or
there's a
55
reason all
or
this.
something,
Yeah, quite rare. This one.
I
Last
guess the
year-
question is it the sale price for the homeowner? Or is it the purchase price for the home buyer? Which are we using for calibration?
I'm sorry, calibration of what?
Of like what's affordable, what makes it worth buying a differently calibrated house?
So, what's gonna happen? What it is, like, you see a house and it's like, it comes on the market for $1.1 million, let's say, right? And that's like it could go either way, right? It's at the edge for a builder, the builder might go for it. But buyers are gonna come look at it. And now they start to say, all right, they do start getting a calculator out. Oh, needs new siding, ching ching, needs a new roof, ching ching, needs a new heating system, ching ching. They start adding up all the
Right,
numbers.
but this is the factor that we're looking for.
And then they start to say, okay, well, I have to add $250,000 to this thing so I can move in. Now it goes from 1.1 to 1.35.
But that's still less than
That's
most of
still,
them think.
But they might say, fine, I'll do that. Or they might say, I can't, I'll go buy the other house down the street that's 1.35, like, I'll go buy a different house. Not everybody wants to do projects, first of all.
to get that.
No, that's true.
But the builder says, I don't care, right? I'm just gonna knock it down. So that, it depends on how much work is required. I sold one on a street over by Perry Park, and it was 1.3, and it was actually a builder bidding on a small lot house, but it was such a great spot, that they were willing to do that. And but the buyers were looking at it, and they knew they had work to do, but there were a couple of them that said, I'll take that on.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that's where the quality of the house.
And
the
location.
upkeep of the house and location.
Yeah.
Puts it either into a competitive bid with end users and builders, or it's not in great enough shape and the end user thinks they have to put X in. And either they're willing to do it because they can do it, or they were willing to do it later or phase it, they buy the fixer upper and, you know, do what they can.
Most of them are doing it before they move in. If it's big, like that one, they were gonna do a lot of work before they ever moved in.
So where,
Okay,
where
I
do we
know.
go with this?
Yeah.
Because it's part of what we're doing, and it's very different from the bulk question.
But it's important. for
But
us
it's,
to know.
it's, for many of us, it's very, very important. Because it affects who could live here.
I think maybe what you have to do is you have to say, with the existing rules in place, a builder could buy this lot, lot 12 or whatever, and this is what happened on lot 12 or 5 or 7, whatever number. They were willing to pay 1.1 and they sold it for 2.8 or something like that. Now we're gonna put two different rules in place. So what is the sellout different? What's the difference in the sellout? And then that is gonna tell you what the new purchase price is gonna be, right?
But I think
So
there's
instead of
also-
1.1, it might go down to 1 or 900
Right.
based on the change in that sellout number.
But then at some point, though, the buyer who's gonna live there is gonna overtake what that developer is gonna pay
Right,
if it drops down further enough.
yeah.
And that's really that delta between the two is what your impact to the current owner would be.
Right.
If they don't take care of their house. I think it's like, so basically what we kind of aim to do is to incentivize people to really, you know, try to keep their house in good condition and wait for some end user to come along and work with them rather than trying to stimulate competition between developers.
Or to make it feel like everybody's end result's gonna be a tear.
Yeah, there's only, because now it's been so
Don't have
long.
people just give up.
Exactly, it's been so long and people just assume, it's weird, you read, you know, on
It's a
social media, you
self-fulfilling
hear,
prophecy.
they feel people like, my house is gonna be a tear down. It's like, well, you own it. Doesn't be, like, what are you talking, how do you know that? Like,
And
they
that
have no
range-
agency.
I mean, we purchased a house last year, in that range, you go to a good home in that 1.1, 1.3 market, you're gonna have 4 or 5 offers a week.
Yeah.
You know, some will be developers, some will be homeowners. You're still gonna have people if you maintain it.
Yeah.
The
If it's-
tension
if it's-
is, how do
if
you
it's not too
protect the
weird and it
interest?
doesn't have too much going wrong with it, right?
How do you protect the interest of the seller, the homeowner, current homeowner, and the potential buyer who wants to live in the house? And there's a tension there. So how do we, what can we do by way of public policy that would protect the interest of both of those? Because the people who live at that house now have a vote in town meeting to some extent.
Right.
So they're going to need to be comfortable enough to support that when it comes to a vote.
Right, but there's two different parties, there's 3 parties, right? There's the homeowner, there's the buyer that would come along and buy their house as is. Change paint and wallpaper, put a new
Right.
roof on, get a new heating system and say, let's go. And then there's the buyer that would not even touch that, but wants the new construction house. So
Right.
there's 3 parties really potentially involved in
That's
that
true.
particular property.
Oh, well, they're four, because there's
The builder
a
as well.
person who wants to buy it and build a new house, and then there's the builder who wants to buy it and sell and
Yeah.
build a new house. Those might be 2 very different visions. A builder would probably build as big as he can build it to get the maximum profit. Somebody who's going in to build just a new house sees it's in bad shape, I'm just gonna build a 3,500 square foot house, or 3,000 square foot house, because that's all I need, I don't need 6.
Yeah,
That's
I've
not
had a lot of people say to me, oh, I don't need a house that big. You know, I want a smaller house, like 3,000 square feet or something. And I'm like, okay. And I said, do you want to study on the first floor? Oh, yeah. Do you want a mudroom? Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, then
And
you
what
look at,
about a pantry? You want a pantry off your kitchen?
but it's
Definitely.
cost,
If I'm building a new house, I want a pantry.
but they gotta
And
buy
next,
it.
next thing you know, they've got a 5,000 square foot house.
And they want.
Bill,
the
don't
maximum-
ask
If
them
they
those
can afford
questions.
to buy it.
And they want what they want.
And they want the maximum value for it in the future when they go to resell it.
Yeah.
So-
Well,
It's
we were
hard.
talking
It's hard.
about changes that would make the house less huge on the lot, and particularly focused on, shall we decide to count attic space in the floor area ratio? And that might be somewhat of a discouragement for putting any living space in the attic. So the developer is faced with, okay, previously I could put some living space in the attic, hot overheated attic, I could put some living space.
It's all nicely air conditioned now with.
It's all
foam-
air conditioned.
Yeah.
Foam,
And-
foam insulation up there.
But now really
and
it's only
plywood windows.
reasonable to do a pull-down staircase. Is that going to significantly affect the value of the house
Well, not
for,
necessarily.
to the developer?
If the lot coverage increases, because most of these houses didn't fulfill their lot coverage, then so the house squashes, gets a little more squat, but I don't know that you're necessarily gonna lose a ton of space, are you?
In doing what we would be doing with changing the height,
Changing the height, but enlarging the,
we're not.
or allowing full lot coverage. I mean, the builder would have to change their plans.
A lot of those third floors are such useless spaces anyway. You know, it's like a big
There's some
space. and
very
now the-
big-
If they
There's
choose to
others
go
up
up
there.
and
Now
not
the
cover the
seller can-
lot to the extent
the
that they're
builder can
allowed, I mean,
put it,
that's
know,
their choice.
And the builder can count it as square footage, so in MLS, it looks big. But then you go and you're like, oh,
How
the
many
living room
uses?
is 13 by 13, you know, like what happened to the house, you know, it's all up there.
Well, I mean, I thought part of this did also have to do with, let's say, lot coverage or the, you know, flooding, what's happening with the bulk of the basements into the ground, the trees being cut down. I know we haven't talked much about that, but I'm certainly not looking for the houses to cover more of the ground space.
Right.
No, I'm just
I
saying
want
that
to cover less of the ground space.
consensus
personally.
was, the consensus was on the survey was that the height was the most offensive factor, not the lot coverage.
There were
So I'm just
also a
pointing
lot
that out.
Yes, but there were a lot of houses that are really big, and so they were saying
Fair.
that goes deep into the house, there's not a lot of land left.
Plus,
So
it's
there's a
hard
fair
to
amount.
sell-
And
hard to
on
sell a
this-
house with a small yard.
Yeah.
There's one right now that just went under agreement, but it took forever to sell it, and it was because it had no yard space in the back. You know, and eventually somebody's gonna move in there, because it's a nice house in a great location, right? But they would have wanted a yard, right? And you know, we're helping out the builder, but not helping out the future homeowner in that case, right?
And people with that much money at that point, you like the house, but they like a little bit of space. They want a little yard.
Yeah.
They'd otherwise be in Manhattan or Back Bay or something like that.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think this thing is really complicated, and I was thinking about another unforeseen possible consequences, that if you reduce the sizes of the house, well, the market could recalibrate to make your new maximum much more valuable. So for example, we say you can build a $2.8 million house, and we change it so you can only build a $2 million house. Well, today's $2 million house, if it became the new maximum, might actually go for 2.2 or 2.3 because you would have such high demand for it, because it would be the new maximum. And these existing houses could in theory go up in value more because you couldn't build them anymore. And some historical houses might get more value. They're the older big ones like around Fair Oaks and whatnot, and other parts of town. So, cause I do market analysis for a living, very hard to tell how prices change. I mean, another thing that everyone forgets during this whole process, 2017, people were complaining about $700,000 for a house. It's absurd, you know, this market. Now we're already at 1 million, 1.2.
You mean for tear down?
Yeah, for the teardowns. But also the mortgage rates went up drastically at the same time. So there's just so many, which is completely counterintuitive because people want to study, you know, the housing values and the impacts. And the first question you would say, well, what happens to property values or asset values if interest rates increase and mortgage rates increase? Oh, they go down, obviously, right? No, not, I mean, it's literally completely counterintuitive. So I think in terms of what a working group could do, I don't know, because we have so many of these thoughts that are just jumbled around and we're going over it, maybe just to start the data, to have a good data set to look over, and then also just kind of organizing the thoughts and the implications.
So what is the data that we need to collect next? I will just jump ahead on the agenda and
Yeah.
tell you that Oscar and I are going to be talking to one of the people who works for the town of Wellesley with respect to their issues. And then we'll bring that back to this group. But what else do we need to do between now and the next meeting?
One thing, I thought that the materials that were handed out last month would have included this and didn't, and the materials this month they're not there either. At the meeting, at 2 meetings ago, the one in January, I asked and Lee Newman seemed to agree that it will be provided, and that is good explanations for the comparable towns that we're looking at on what their rules are. I think we should be looking at that. And we haven't got the information yet. So you asked what we should be, what data we should be gathering, and you mentioned Wellesley,
Right.
but there's other towns too that we should be looking at.
We haven't looked at them in detail, but we have the bylaws for multiple towns and how they're measuring their houses.
And it was provided in one of the meeting
Yeah,
packages
yeah.
as well, probably
Well,
two
it might have
meetings
been to
ago.
the working group. I
No,
have it.
was-
I created it. I can email it to everybody and we can put it in the next packet. I think it hasn't been in the packet because it hasn't been something,
Hasn't been the focus of that.
We haven't,
topic,
Yeah.
we haven't gone
but I have
over.
it. So
Yeah,
I'll send it out to you. I think I have one thing I need to edit in it, so if I don't do it tomorrow, I'll do it this week. But I'll
Great.
email it to everyone so you can be looking at it. And, yeah,
So one of the things that we did talk about was that Lincoln was doing their calculations on their lot coverage, their FAR. And that they were actually using a different formula. And that the formula was actually tied directly to the size of the lot.
mhm.
And what that does, we think, is it's worth looking at, that you establish what we think is a fair size house, and then you do a multiplier on that that takes into account the size of the lot. So you start off with a certain square footage of a home, and then you do a multiplier times the size of the lot, and it actually creates the FAR specifically for that lot. So-
Don't we do something similar?
No,
In our
Ours is
rules?
just straight up 38, 36. No difference.
There,
in
well,
lot.
there is the difference between 38, 36.
Yeah, but that's
Yeah.
all the way up to
Then
12,000
maybe I'm
square
thinking
foot
of
lot.
lot coverage.
So we
There
have a-
seemed to be a chart with lot coverage for different size of lots. But,
Not for us.
okay.
Yeah, but that's the thing that's challenging right now, because we have from 7 to 12,000, it's 38. It's a 0.38.
Mhm.
That's a very different size lot from 7 to 12.
Yeah, true.
So I
So,
think that's what we're, that's another fine tuning of how to measure and what to measure. And where you do the transitions to different limits, or we just do something that does literally calculate it to the lot size. And again, keeping in mind that the math has to be something that's not calculus.
all right, so in the interest of everybody's time, Alex is gonna put on or distribute to us what we have by way of other towns' bylaws. Oscar and I are gonna have a preliminary meeting with Wellesley to see if we're talking to the right person, to get a sense of how they view their experience. Because everybody I talk to outside of this keeps talking about Wellesley. So at least we can have that information. The other thing we need to do, and I think we should be meeting with Artie before the next meeting, our working group, to try to figure out what it is we should be giving to the planning board so that they will have something to report to town meeting in May.
Mhm.
So we have to create a package that we can give them in April. Yes.
Well, they need as much time as they can possibly have to look at what they want to convey to town meeting. I don't think anybody expects a finished recommendation at town meeting in May. That's not possible.
Right.
But at least the planning board needs to report to town meeting since it was referred back to them.
And the real estate is probably some sort of report on assessing the real estate impacts would be helpful.
I don't know, I don't believe we need that information before town meeting. As far as, what we found out as far as assessed values. Is,
No, but in terms of what
What is the-
planning board wants to say to town meeting, if anything.
Well, I understand that. No, I realize that. No, I think obviously we're going to give a report. But the report is where we are at this where we are at that or at this moment in time. It's simply where we are. We don't need to, I use the word rush. We don't need to force something that isn't going to be ready. It's not necessary.
Nobody's
Right? We're
advocating
just
that.
saying they're parallel studies here. One set of studies is what we've been talking about, which is how do we measure currently, and where do we think we have, some kind of an issue, that something's too big, and how are we gonna assess that? How are we gonna adjust for that? The other issue is the stuff we've been talking about on just the history of the real estate transactions, and if there's some way for us to have that information put together, so that helps us understand what the impacts or what the trends have been. And that's, that then could be potentially looked at if we come up with a set of changes that have to be evaluated for what they would do to the potential sale price.
I mean, that's what we're talking, just a summary of what, really just a summary of what we've been doing and how, and just how we're looking at it. I don't see any need to give any factual results.
Okay.
I don't believe we need any, because our goal is to eventually get to something that's gonna work. Our goal is not, having information that has to be presented by May. It's just, we have to just present a summary of what we've been doing.
Well, you're the representative from the planning board, so.
Yeah, I don't think we need a conclusion. I don't think we need any conclusion of any one specific point at all that we're talking. Just a summary of what we're doing and maybe an idea of how we've been looking at it. Any more than that, I don't say.
Whatever we give the planning board, it doesn't matter right now, it just matters what we're doing, and we think we need to be doing some real estate analysis.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what matters, what we need to be doing, period.
And that we're going to need some resource to build some models, small scale models to be able to visualize what we're talking about.
Mhm.
Do you have any other remarks before we close the meeting? Go ahead, Bill.
I can pull data that shows like over the last 5 years or however many years, like the houses that have been built and what they replaced, what that sold for, and what the lot size was, and what the square footage of the house was, and sort of some raw data like that, and we can.
That would be great, because a lot of what we hear about is anecdotal and this makes it objective, so that would be great.
I think an important comparison for that though is probably lots that weren't built, that were sold, but weren't built out, that were sold to end users. Because I think
we need that, we
Yes,
need the sold and torn down, sold to homeowners, end users.
I think a starting point could be the
Nice,
same
simple.
as the houses we did as the under 10,000 square foot lots, or the non-conforming lots. For the most part, I know it's never going to be an exact science because you don't necessarily know the conditions. But if we could do a random selection of houses.
That's a lot more houses, but.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be all of them. I'm saying a random selection if there was 20 of each or something like that. That kind of thing.
Yeah, just so we have a picture of what's been happening that's
To see if there's
at least
trends
close
there
to
that are-
objective.
Do we want to stay with the non-conforming lots for right now, or?
I think it's probably better to stay with the non-conforming lots for
Or
right
just
now.
the smaller lots.
I suppose, I think that it's
I don't
time to start
understand
looking
why.
more at the 10,000 square foot.
We
as
just
well.
wanna
Say, are we gonna
Cause we need to,
We're gonna
do the
start
same
moving
thing.
into the larger
Yeah.
lots, yes.
It's another
I mean-
step.
you're pulling all the data, you might, I don't,
Yeah.
think you might as well just pull it all.
We can parse them into smaller lots and larger lots, but yeah.
Yeah, to Gene's point, maybe it does make sense to gather that data at the same time.
Instead of two tranches.
I mean, to study these particular houses and how large they appear when they are on undersized lots, I thought was an interesting study. But that, where we're going now, I don't understand why we need to focus on that particular thing.
No, we don't.
The reason we started that way, of course, is because the impact is greater in those neighborhoods, but you're right.
And we are potentially looking at trying to figure out a new way of setting controls for different lot sizes. So bringing down controls to 7,000 and 8,000 square foot lots, and then maybe there's a 9 to 10, or maybe it's 7 to 9 and 10 to 12, something, somewhere in there, we have two different sets of FARs and controls for the smaller lots, and then the medium size, and then over 12 or something like that. I mean, those are the choices we have to.
So can you do that, Bill?
Yes. I'll
Do you need a
I'll-
wing? You need a wing. now.
I'll describe what I think I'm gonna do and send it to somebody and see
You
if
send it to me and Artie and Oscar.
an open meeting laws, that's okay.
Yeah, we're not a quorum and it can be a matter of public record. It's not a problem. It should go into the public part of our work.
Well, already.
You don't have to send it to me, just send it to the two chairs, that's fine.
Okay.
Then I can decide.
And on that note, I just have a quick question, having nothing to do with this conversation. How are we publicizing these meetings?
Is it just
They're
on the town
posted.
website?
They're posted, and Needham Observer was here this evening. So they're talking about this.
The people who Zoom, do we have, do we have people coming to these or not?
Greenberg is on
Should
it.
right now.
But if you think there are better ways to get the word out, please,
Yeah.
we should. That's fine.
Yeah, and then my last question is, have we as a committee heard from any people in town that are kind of in opposition to what we're doing? I'm just curious, like, if there's people that don't think there's a problem,
I'm
Well,
sure
there are
there are people
definitely
and they
people who
haven't
don't
communicated with us.
but none of them have communicated with us.
I have.
I'm not aware of any. Are you?
I,
will
I
say-
thought one builder sent something to Lee saying this group should be disbanded or something like that, or it's not needed at all.
I just
That would
didn't know.
save us some time,
Yeah,
but I don't think. we're
I
gonna
just
do
didn't know
that.
what the public
Yeah.
sentiment
Well,
was.
there is a list, excuse me, there is a list of all the public meetings that goes out in the town newsletter that goes out every week.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not
I read it.
featured,
Yeah.
but it is there.
It's on the calendar, right, too?
It's on the
On the
calendar,
website,
which is on the
so-
website.
I know, I agree, it's a good, I would have done something myself, maybe on social media, like, but I thought we were just too little raw. And there was a little, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I
It's still a
totally
little
get that.
amorphous,
It's just,
yeah.
after what the town
For
has
sure.
like,
Oh, no,
been
definitely.
through with, like, we're always being, or not we, but
Yeah,
there's always the accusation that we're not
yeah.
publicizing and people don't know, and
Yeah.
just some of the typical things that the town does to communicate, obviously isn't reaching an audience, and
Yeah.
we should just try.
Well, it's not reaching an audience that's listening to what
Right.
the town publishes and I'm not a town officer anymore, but there are numerous sources for what's being discussed in this town.
Yeah.
So people have to take some initiative to figure out
I
what they're
agree.
interested in.
I agree with both of those things, but I do think that eventually we'll have some kind of public
Yeah.
hearing.
Oh,
or
ultimately, of
forum,
course.
And that would be something that we would promote more broadly, like
Okay.
actively promote more broadly.
Even before you actually put something before the planning board and have it for the formal legally required hearing, you're talking about having.
I mean, I think this
Forum.
committee should, when we start to come
Yes.
up with something that seems like it's going someplace, we should actively promote.
Right.
It's just like these conversations are, no offense, but a little meandering. So we,
It's a working group.
yeah, exactly. So, it's a
One-
mixed bag if you
Yeah.
invite people, you know what I mean?
I'm just anticipating what's coming.
Oh, I hear you.
Oh,
Well, I
Well,
mean,
that's-
if we wanted to have something for the fall, then certainly we're gonna get this to the planning board, in the summertime, let's say, if we're gonna have something in the fall, because then the planning board needs to talk about it, then have our meeting. So that's it. If we wanna try to have something for the fall town meeting, then we need it to the planning board. Our group needs to send it to the planning board by the summertime.
And there
Um,
needs to be a lot of public discussion before that town.
Yeah.
I might be the one to break it to you guys that I don't think that schedule is possible.
I agree. I
Yeah.
agree.
Um,
Wholeheartedly.
I
so
agree, yeah, I don't
have
think it's gonna work
language
either.
done With new zoning by like
Yeah.
June,
No,
Yeah,
that's
so
not
I
possible.
just don't think it's possible.
And there
No,
needs
it's
to
not.
be some,
Yeah,
you know,
I agree, I agree.
schedule of public meetings. The noticing requirements alone will.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's gonna work. We have too much we wanna do and we wanna get, I'll use the phrase, get it right. So it's not gonna work for October.
If we
All right,
do an update at the Maytown meeting,
Yeah,
that will get people talking about it.
Yeah.
exactly.
It will.
Yeah.
And of course, there was all the campaign about yes for Needham and the referendum recently, and I was standing outside Sudbury Farms quite a bit, talking to people. And this is what I often heard. We want to have all of this development and you want to have this housing that's more affordable. But what are you doing about the tear downs? You're not doing anything about the tear downs. I heard that frequently. Did others?
We've heard this for 3 years.
Yeah, yeah.
10 years, 15 years.
Yeah.
I mean,
So it is something people are concerned about.
We need that
I've
public
been
hearing
here for 65.5 years.
and debates at the town meeting
Mhm.
multiple times, so it's, I think it was also anticipated that October 25 would be the target, we could continue to discuss. But as an anecdote, I'm back here for a wedding, a friend from middle school, and another guy came back as well, and he picked me up, he brought me up, completely unsolicited. This doesn't feel like the place that we grew up anymore, everything is just full of boxes, it doesn't feel like I could have ever lived here, they settled somewhere else. Didn't even ask, he just brought it up on his own volition, so. I think there is, but yeah, as soon as we get to even April, I think we'll have some documents in May and we can really start like asking people to make their voices more heard. I think one thing that I thought that we could also do is now that we've had a few meetings, remember at the beginning, we had the charge and we're thinking, well, what do we want to achieve? Maybe we just ask that question again, like 3 to 5 sentences for each person for their objectives.
That's a good point. We can.
What's our
We can
charge?
discuss that. On that note, I think we would entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second,
So motion made and seconded. We're going to do a roll call vote. Heidi,
Yes.
Ed,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
Rob,
Yes.
Yes.
Oscar, yes.
Yes.
Handle, yes.
Yes.
And Tina
Yes.
and Paul.
and
Jean.
yes.
And Artie.
Artie,
Yes, yes, yes.
meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Okay.
Thanks, Al.